Welcome to Retire Coast, where we discuss all things retirement, life on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and your financial welfare. Bill Anderson, your host, is a serial entrepreneur having created many successful businesses and holds a real estate broker's license, speaks about personal experiences with each topic. Listen, learn, and improve the quality of your life.
Well, welcome back to Retire Coast. We're going to talk today about how will fancy coffee destroy your budget now? Now, that is actually the title of an article that I have written on the retirecoast.com website. It's one of our blog articles. And the topic may be a little bit misleading, but I want to go into this in some more detail. It's something that has concerned me for a while. I was one of those people who would go down to Starbucks and buy that expensive, fancy coffee on almost a daily basis when I was doing my commute back and forth to my office. And I didn't think much of it at that time. I had a pretty good income, and it was just a kind of a drop in the bucket. But I learned much later on that that was symptomatic of a lot of people who would go in and do the same thing, buy that expensive coffee, and yet have trouble paying their credit card bill for that expensive coffee, for example. And I found that it kind of correlates. Now, it was one thing for me at my stage in life where I was doing well financially, but a lot of younger people can't really afford to buy this coffee. I know they think of it as their indulgence, but bear with me for a moment while I explain how this is symptomatic of people who have trouble balancing their budgets. And I'm talking about probably the majority of Americans now. Let's just talk about that coffee just for a moment. And listen, I like the coffee myself, and I enjoy a good cappuccino. So what I learned, even when I could afford to go to Starbucks, was that there was actually a better way. I didn't need to spend the time to drive in there and wait in line. I guess you can put it on your phone and go to pick it up, but I didn't need to get off the interstate to do that. I was looking around and I thought, one day I was over at Starbucks and they actually had a cappuccino machine for sale. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then I thought about it a little bit more. And eventually I ended up buying a very fancy machine that would take the milk and turn it into steam and do the entire coffee without having to, put the grind the grinds up, put them in that little cup, put it on there, and go through that whole process. This was very simple. The beans went into a hopper, and the water was in another hopper, and then the milk was in the refrigerator in a special kind of carafe. I just snapped that on there and pushed the buttons, and in just a couple of minutes, I ended up with a cappuccino that was every bit as good as the one I would get over at Starbucks. And I never really thought much about the savings. I knew there was a big savings for doing it, but I did it pretty much for convenience. Now, years later, I was listening to a talk by Mr. Wonderful, and everybody knows who he is. He was on the Shark Tank. And he was talking about how a lot of young people spend money on things they can't afford, and they don't understand it. And he was able to correlate some of that spending with other spending down the line. In other words, if you're trying to balance a budget, you make an exception here, then you make an exception there, and pretty much you're in debt and you can't get out of it. So let me get back to the coffee for a moment and explain that, a Starbucks coffee is going to cost you, I don't know, anywhere from $5 to $6 to $7. It's hard to tell depending on where you're at and what type of cappuccino or frappuccino or whatever you get. But I have done some calculations on my machine, and even with the cost of spending $1,000 to buy a machine, my coffee is less than $1 per cup. And I have the ability to make anything. I can make a cappuccino, I can make a latte, I can make all those kinds of things. And that $1 or less than $1 includes the cost of the machine, the cost of the supplies to make it, coffee, milk, all those kinds of things. So that's a huge difference. Not only that, the savings in fuel, if you want to add that in for going out of your way to go to a place. How about the time savings too? Now, if you're the type of person that likes to go to Starbucks and sit there and have a cup of coffee and do some work, that's different. That's not the same that I'm talking about here. So that's a way to start. So you start saving there and you go, wow, if I can make a little investment and I can save this much money on my coffee, what else will it do for me? And then, and you don't have to give up that cappuccino. As I mentioned, this is one way to do it. But so let me explain that, spending on morning coffee can have other effects. It's a daily habit impact, for example. So that coffee was going to cost you about $1,825 a year if you get one every day. Now, not all of us get one every day. Maybe it's just the 5 days a week that you're working. But if you go down to the local coffee shop on the weekends, then it could add up to that much. And the lifestyle choices. Fancy coffee purchases are often seen as a broader lifestyle choice, can indicate a preference for spending on small luxuries, which can reflect on a larger pattern of spending on non-essential items, and that's what I've been trying to get to. The money spent on the coffee could have been saved or redirected to other financial goals. Budget awareness. Younger people who frequently buy coffee may not be fully aware of the cumulative impact on their budgets, especially if they aren't accurately managing their finances, and many people do not. During the time when people would use the checking account and write checks, you would typically keep track of where your spending was. But with the use of credit cards and ATM machines now, people are losing track of their budget. And spending on these little luxuries ends up eroding the cash that they earn. But there's also, cultural influence on this too. It's a lifestyle thing. It's a social thing. And in some cases, maybe that's okay. If you meet some friends there and you're getting a coffee, that's fine. I'm not saying that doing any of that is not good. What I'm saying is it's the fancy coffee by itself, getting it every day, is the beginning of what could be a potential problem for people that are having trouble balancing their budgets. They're running up their credit cards. They don't own a house because they don't think they have enough money. They can't save the money for the house. And yet, what they're doing is they're driving usually an expensive car that they probably can't afford. They have to pay the insurance for it. It's symptomatic. Particularly when you're younger, you want to be like everybody else, so you end up buying the latest fashions, latest clothing, and you don't think about the fact that you can't really afford that. Now, if you happen to have a job making a lot of money, and when you're young, you may be fortunate, but that doesn't mean you always will. If you take a look at just spending for spending's sake or buying things that you don't need, there's a difference between buying what you don't need and buying what you do need. There's a big gap there. That money could be going towards helping you buy a house. All the complaints that people talk about, they can't pay off their student loans, etc. Maybe it's because some of their cash is going in the wrong direction. My article covers a couple of other areas too that are interesting, and they include tipping. Now, a lot of younger people will tip, looking at that ticket that comes to their table. It says, okay, 18%, 25%, 30%. Believe it or not, I've seen them say 35%, up to 35% for a tip. And a lot of young people, a lot of people in general will use that and just calculate it out, and they'll pay for the tip. Let me explain something about this, because some young people actually are working in restaurants or waiters, that kind of thing. And my wife did for many, many years. So I fully understand the concept of tipping, and I'm not against it at all. But let's talk about what's real here. Someone that works for tips has a unique job. Their income increases with inflation. Now, everyone knows inflation's up about 25%. Therefore, the income that's been earned by people in those kinds of jobs on tips has gone up about 25% as well. That doesn't count the increases in salary in some cases in California and other places where that has been mandated. But let's just go back a moment to the fact that their income is based on inflation. So it's automatically adjusted. And yet, companies that make the point of sale systems over the years have tried to use tips as a way to sell their point of sale system to the owners. They're saying, well, we'll just put on the ticket that people have the option to pay these various rates. And the rates went from a typical 15%, which, by the way, has not always been a typical rate. It used to be 10%. And then for some reason, about 25 years ago, it went to 15%. And now they're trying to push it to 20%, 25%, 30%. Well, that's outrageous, because a tip should be paid out based on the service that's been provided and not expected. And that's a problem that a lot of us have with tipping, because now it's expected. Now, I might feel really generous if I have the money, and I might want to pay 20%, for example. But I'll do it because I know I can afford it. A lot of younger people are paying these tips out at higher rates, and they cannot afford it, but they feel they need to do it, or they feel good about it, or they say, oh, well, that person did a good job. You know what? It's time to be a little introspective here. You have to think about yourself. Can you afford to do that? And the answer is you may not be able to do that. If you want to go out and eat, you have to be careful about what you spend money on, and that includes the tip. So there's nothing wrong with paying 15% if the service is good, and paying less than that if the service is poor. If you've asked for some things and you didn't get them, and you've asked again and you didn't get them, well, let me give you an example. I was at a restaurant a couple of days ago, and the person one of the people I was with, asked for a refill on his soda. And the waitress, if you call it a waitress or attendant or server, whatever the term is, that person walked by several times and didn't get him his Diet Coke, and he was thirsty. So he finally said it to her again. Hey, what happened to my... Oh, yeah, I'll get it for you. And then she walked around, and you could see her going from one table to another. She forgot about it, maybe because she didn't write it down. But she finally brought it out late in the meal. He wasn't happy about that. We had ordered at the very beginning some onion rings. They were going to be an appetizer for us. There were three of us at the table. So we told her we'd like to get some onion rings appetizers. She said, oh, yeah, they're really great. Onion rings are really great. So what happens? Our meal comes out, no onion rings. And I said, look, we don't want the onion rings now. It was supposed to be an appetizer. She said, oh, well, there's this or that. I don't know what it was. Didn't make any difference. She should have come back and told us that we weren't going to get our onion rings as an appetizer. I said, please take the onion rings off the bill. She said, yeah, okay, fine, I'll take them off the bill. Well, the bill comes out, guess what? It's got onion rings on the bill. Well, there was no way that this person was going to get more than about 10%. And frankly, I should not have given anything, but I've been brainwashed into giving something. This person was provided terrible service at that table. It's not the first time. On the other side, of course, I'm a little bit older, and I have a financial situation where I can afford to pay a more generous tip, and I have done so when the service has been simply outstanding, greater than my expectation. So I don't want to beat this over the head. This is just one element we wanted to talk about today, was the tip situation. But for those of you that are younger, we'll just kind of keep track of this as we go along. Don't spend all your money on fancy coffee or fancy drinks. Cut back on those and find another way to get that for less money by doing it yourself. Number two, pay a reasonable amount for a tip if you have to pay a tip at all. And if you don't believe me, you can listen to several other people who have talked about this. They're over on YouTube. Another thing about the budget situation is donations. On the retail side, when you go to the store these days, they keep asking for donations. Every single place I've been to, grocery stores, they want a donation. They want a roundup. Well, you know what? You don't know where that money's going. They try to tell you where it's going. You get no benefit for that. Even psychologically, you don't, because that money is going to be donated by that store in their name. They're going to get some kind of a publicity benefit for it. That may not be a place you want to put your money. If you want to donate, if you can afford to donate, and here's my caveat on that. When you're younger and you're trying to build a life and you want to buy a house and those kinds of things, you may not be in a position where you can afford to donate. Don't feel compelled to do this at that point. Later on, when you're doing well financially, that's when you can donate. I mean, take a look at these billionaires, Microsoft billionaires and all these others. They're giving away their money, but where are they? They're in their 60s, they're in their 70s. They've made it. They have the money to do that, and they're giving it away. They may not have been able to afford that when they were coming up early on. So think about it this way. If you want to give donations, you can push that off until later. I'm talking about cash donations now, not clothing or something else. You can push it off until you can afford it later on. But a lot of younger people will donate, for example, by saying at the retail store, oh, yeah, okay, go ahead and take that money. All right, don't do it. But if you feel you need to give some money to something like the Salvation Army, then donate to the Salvation Army. Give them the money, write them a check, because you know where that money's going. It was your choice. It wasn't some arcane organization that just started up where the people that are running the organization are taking 80% of the money. So that's my suggestion on donations. If you can't afford it, don't do it. And then applications. Oh, many of us we're just paying for all kinds of apps on our phone. We're paying for apps on our computer that we don't use and don't need. Maybe we did at one time, but we don't need it now. And what's happening is those are annual things that keep getting renewed over and over again, and we don't pay any attention. They charge it to your credit card. That's one reason why you're in debt. So go through your credit cards and start cutting all that out. Tell these people, no, you don't want a renewal or you want a refund in those cases. And don't buy all of those apps if you don't need them. A good example is I have the Microsoft Suite, but I don't use it because Google provides all of those things for free. Now, I'm not working at an office all day where I need it constantly. For those applications, the company can pay for that. But for you at home to be paying for these applications that you don't need when there are free applications out there, let me give you another example. I have a number of limited liability companies, and I help other people get their limited liability companies started as well. And they'll go out and they'll spend big dollars on an accounting system, QuickBooks or some of the others. And then there's a constant expense going out, even when they're trying just to start a business and they don't have a lot of money. Well, there's a free accounting system available online. It's called Wave Apps. I'm not getting paid to tell you this, by the way. And I've been using that for years for all of mine. I don't pay a penny for that, and it's an excellent system, and it's online, and I use that instead of paying for something else. My point is there are a lot of free things out there that you can replace these paid applications for. That's another way you can save money. Then let's talk about going to the store and buying different things that you may be paying way over the top for brand name products. I was in the retail business for a number of years as a manager, and we were trained. Our company had its own brand names, and then there were the big brand names too. Well, what we were told by the manufacturers was that the products that had our store name on them were every bit as good as the other products. You know how much more expensive it would be to make a separate product to sell? Well, they don't often. It's the same thing with the same label on it. So take a step down and pay less money to buy something. Put that cash aside. I'll give you an example. I needed to get some material to put down my drain. So I went over to Walmart and I looked, and I've got on the website here, a liquid plumber was $9.88. and it says the application is 12.4 cents each. Their own brand, Walmart's brand, was $5.52, and the application was 6.9 cents. So about half the price. And this product works for me. I've used it several times. It does the same kind of job that Liquid Plumber did when I was buying that. So why would I want to pay twice? If I had lots and lots of money, I still shouldn't pay twice. And what I'm getting at is, especially for you younger people, is stop buying brand names. Stop watching the commercials and spending all that money when you can buy products at the grocery store that are equally as good if you buy the store's brand. Remember, the companies that are making a lot of these products for those stores are putting the same product in the store's package as they're putting in their own package. I know this for a fact with liquor. I don't want to get into that right now because it upsets people when I have this conversation with them. But I was trained on that, and I just don't want to talk about that right now. My point is that there's no need for you to overspend. Let's talk about the car. You're considering buying a new car. Take time to reconsider and hold on to that other car. When you've had a car for a while and you paid it off, there's no reason to go back into debt to get another car. Why? Because you feel good about it, or you want that new BMW or Mercedes. Listen, I've been there. I have been there and done that. I have had every luxury car on the market pretty much that I bought brand new, and I wasted thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, I say I could afford that, and I was making enough money to afford that, but I threw the money away. Now, later in life, if I had all that money, I might be taking some pretty nice vacations or donating the money or helping, my family or something else, but I would have that cash. Instead, I, drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and I would be buying the cars and spending all that money. Every time you buy a car, you pay sales tax on it. A car is a depreciating asset. So you lose money on a car when you first drive it off the parking lot. And then a couple of years later, you say, oh, maybe it's time to get another car. Well, this is maybe time for you to reconsider keeping that car. For years, as I mentioned, I would buy a new car about every 2 years. Now, sometimes there were company cars, and the company paid for the car, and that would be fine. But later on, let me tell you, I bought a pickup truck because I need it for hauling my fifth wheel. I have paid that off in about 4 years. The interest rate was only like 1.5%. Otherwise, I would have paid cash for it. And I paid it off, and I have owned that pickup truck for another 4 years, and I had no payment on that truck. And it's really nice not to have a payment. And yet, I kept it up. I put money into it. I didn't need to do any major repairs. I just did all the maintenance work on it. And it was far less expensive. The other thing that happens, too, is that your insurance rates will drop with an older vehicle. And it's, eventually going to be a vehicle that you will have paid off and you're not paying anything on. And the longer you keep that vehicle, if you keep it well maintained, you can be saving that money and putting it toward buying a house. All right, so let's get into the thing that really should set you off. Do you have a storage facility? Come on, if you do, say yes. You may be like many, many people that have a storage facility, and you've been paying for that storage facility forever. How often have you been over to that storage facility? Do you even remember what's in there? I have a good friend that had their furniture. They moved from a house, and they stored everything in there, and they went and rented a place, and they only needed a few pieces out of there, but they had the entire house. It was a big storage facility, and they were paying on that for 6 years. They finally decided to move, and they bought a house. When they took everything out of there, they found out that it was just not what they wanted. It was, out of date. It was just stuff they couldn't use. They wouldn't fit into the house, and they ended up selling everything that was in there for almost nothing, and yet they never recovered the amount that they paid for the storage. If you've got a storage place and you haven't used the stuff that's in there over a couple of years, get rid of it all. Stop paying those storage fees. The area I'm living in right now, I see storage units going up all the time. It's a big business here. And the people in there were telling me, I was in there with a friend who needed temporary storage, and they were saying, yeah, people sometimes don't even come in for a year at a time. You know, the payment is taken out of their credit card, which is another reason the credit card debt goes up. Another one of those things that keeps getting charged the credit card every single month. So clear out that storage facility if you don't need it. I really don't need it. I mean, give that some hard thought. Maybe you can put it someplace else, or hey, how about selling the stuff that's in there? Maybe you can get some money for that. Let's take one more shot at the cost of goods at the store. So I was looking, we had just gotten a new air fryer, and I was looking at French fries at the store. Now, I can make French fries at home. Everybody can. All you have to do is peel the potatoes and cut them up and then throw them in the air fryer. But we were looking at just testing it out initially, so we wanted to get some bags. Well, we went over to Walmart again, and we found a bag that was selling for $4.47. That price doesn't really relate to anything today. It could be more or less. But what was important, it was 14 cents per serving. Then we found the Walmart brand was 9.3 cents per serving. That's a big difference. You figure you might have maybe a bag a week or a bag every 2 weeks. That's just the French fries. You can do this up and down the aisles at the store with groceries. You can find all kinds of things that you will be paying more for if you buy the brand name rather than the store's name. Since I already mentioned that before, I don't want to go into it a great deal, but I thought I'd mention that. So let me tell you about the top 10 things people waste money on. And number one is subscription services. I pretty much mentioned that before, but it also includes streaming services, gaming platforms, for example. Eating out is the number two thing. Impulse purchases, buying things on a whim. Brand loyalty, I mentioned that already. Latte factor, I already mentioned that. Unused items, buying things that are rarely used and go unused. Cruises and vacations. You know, I know several people, younger people, that don't have a house, can't afford a house, have maybe a nice car that they can't afford, but they spend the money on it anyway, and yet they go on frequent cruises and vacations. It's all about the experiences, you know. You have to do something to enjoy yourself, but they're expensive, and most people finance those. The ones I know, they don't pay cash for them. They put them on a credit card, and they pay 20% interest on it over time. Fashion trends, I already talked a little bit about that. Gadgets and tech, you know, that is a big one. Even for me, I find that difficult to resist, but I'm doing more of that resisting lately. But you can't just buy everything. And that new iPhone, you have to have that new iPhone. At what, $1,000? Oh, well, don't worry about that because they'll finance that for you over a couple of years and they won't charge you any interest on it. Well, okay, but what about the $1,000? Do you really need it? Now, I was doing that changeover almost every year at first, you know, with the iPhone. But then I realized that there was nothing wrong with the phone that I had. It was working perfectly good, and the cameras got a little bit better. And so one year I did change not long ago because I needed the camera for my business. It was much improved. There were some changes in it, but that's the only reason I did it. So now I'm sitting on a 2-year-old iPhone and have no desire to buy the newest one. Probably won't get the newest one next year or even the year after that as long as it's working fine. So the tech and gadgets, that's a big one. Expensive hobbies, you know, that can drain your finances if you don't need those hobbies. How about playing pickleball or something else that's not so expensive? And then streaming services. We pay a lot of money for streaming services for different videos and things like that, you know, Netflix and all those things. We swapped out the cable, which is, you know, the television services, for example, all of those services for a couple of streaming services. So like Netflix, and we're already getting Prime. I think we have one other. And the cost of those things are about 25% of what we were paying to get the cable television delivered, which we have no need for. If I want to know what the latest news is, I can look it up on the internet and see. I can check it out on my phone, and we have no loss. We can get broadcast stations if I want something that's on NBC or ABC or CBS, for example, and we are saving at least $75 a month, possibly more than that now because the prices keep going up. And that's another way that you can save money, and particularly young people that are on the go. They're not in that often when they're not working or they're not sleeping, and maybe they're out with friends or something else, but yet they pay for these services that they don't get enough use out of. Well, let's talk a little bit about going to a restaurant. As I suggested, restaurants are one of the things that eat up your budget. A lot of people go way too often. So if you're going to go and not cut back, or even if you are going to cut back, let me tell you how you can save money when you go to a restaurant. Now, some of these things I'm telling you might be a no-brainer for you, but for some people, they hadn't thought much about it. So I'm looking at going to a restaurant, for example, and sitting down having I don't know whether it's a hamburger or something else. And the first thing that happens is the order taker comes up and says, "What would you like to drink?" Well, my first reaction in years before might be, if it's dinner, maybe I'm having a margarita, or if it's lunch, maybe a diet soft drink of some kind. And now I tell them I want water. I rarely have a alcoholic beverage at dinner. I'll have them other times. I haven't sworn off of them, but I don't usually do it at dinner, and I don't do it at lunch anymore. I have water. Now, depending on the restaurant you go to, you can save anywhere from $2 to $5 just getting water over soft drinks, and then obviously $10 or more for avoiding that alcoholic drink. And you know what happens when you're drinking alcohol at the same time that you're eating your food is it's almost as if you're mixing the two tastes together. It's different than sitting at a bar and having a drink where you can actually taste the drink. It almost doesn't make a difference that you're having alcohol with dinner. Now, you may want to have some wine with dinner. That's a little bit different. But if you want to avoid that, you can still save some money. So I say that anytime you go, particularly for lunch, have water instead of soft drinks. It may seem like a small thing, but if you're eating out frequently, especially if you're eating out maybe once a day for lunch, you can save a lot of money. It's the same thing, it goes right back to the latte situation too. You can order less expensive items on the menu. If you're just going there to meet some friends and you're not going because, hey, you really wanted the steak that was on the menu, it's just a restaurant, take a look at the menu and see what's on the menu that may be attractive to you. Now, we've included a menu in our article on retirecoast.com, and this is a very nice restaurant in a casino, and they have terrific steaks. They have center cut filet mignon for $52. They have a prime New York steak for $60. They have all kinds of other things in there. But they also have a pasta dish. In this case, it's called pasta Bordeaux. And that pasta dish is $29. That is a lot less money than paying for a steak. In fact, it is the least expensive, but it's delicious. I've had it before. It has shrimp and crawfish in the sauce, everything else. So it's a very delicious meal, but it's less expensive. Often the pasta dish on a menu is less expensive than any of the meat dishes. Sometimes you can get a nice fish dish, and that is less expensive as well. Another thing you might want to ask is, during lunchtime, particularly when a lot of people eat out, is what's the special of the day? Let me give you an example. So we went to a nice restaurant. It's not particularly expensive, but everything is today. in this restaurant, the steak is something like $35, which is less than the one I just mentioned to you. But they have a special on one of the days of the week where you can get the same steak dinner for $15. So a lot of people go. They have a special one day for pork chops, a special one day for something else. So if you're going to go out for a meal, particularly with friends, then look for a restaurant that has a low-cost special. Or if you're going to go and just check out the menu, and again, if you check out the menu and you look at it, you'll find some items on the menu that are less expensive. What I do often is buy off of the appetizer menu if I go to a nicer restaurant, because the appetizers are delicious. I'll order one or two and pay less for it than I would for an entree in there. So there are ways for you to go to a restaurant and still not bust the budget. Well, we could talk about this for a long time. My point is that there are a lot of people out there that are suffering because they just don't understand where their money goes. And I've just given you some examples of ways to cut back and yet not completely cut out. For example, with a coffee, buy the coffee machine, make your own coffee at home. Go to a restaurant and order less expensive items that are still nutritious and they are delicious. Go to the store and buy the store's brand, for example. Don't just buy a new car. Keep your car. Just keep it repaired. Spend the money on it. You'll save tons of money. And there are many, many, many other ways to do this. But that coffee is kind of the start. It's an indicator. If you're spending that $5 or $6 every day of the week, and you are putting it on your credit card and you're paying 20% interest on it and you can't ever seem to get ahead, this is one way to break that cycle. And don't worry about what your friends are going to say, because they're probably in the same boat that you're in. Most of us spend our time around other people in the same socioeconomic range, for example. So if you're having trouble paying your bills and your credit cards are higher, you're probably in the same situation as your friends. And maybe you can teach them a few things. For example, go to a restaurant, and when they're ordering a steak, say, I'm going to order this pasta. It's delicious. It costs half as much as your steak does. So I'm going to be able to take that savings and put it in my investment account. Well, thank you for listening to what I have to say here. And please visit our website at retirecoast.com. We have lots and lots, hundreds of articles in there on lifestyle choices, investments, and real estate, and all kinds of different things that you might find enjoyable, interesting to read. And please come back and listen to our podcast. We try to give you some information that will be helpful in adjusting your lifestyle and improving your financial independence. Thank you.